Thank you for participating in the 2022 Partners in Action Conference. And now I will introduce the presenter. Please welcome Kendra Lowden. She is the owner of Ghost Thunder Child Welfare Consulting LLC. Thank you.
Boja Shayak Manowavan, Kendra Loudon Desnikas, Bode Wadmi Endow, Wajaji Endow, Shishibini in Dibandagwas, St. Louis, Oklahoma, and Ndochbia, Shawnee, Oklahoma, and Daya, Jigwe, Owendodum, Suxy, Owendodum. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kendra Loudon. I live in Shawnee, Oklahoma. I'm from a little town called St. Louis, Oklahoma, of about 150 people, but now I live in town. I am an enrolled member of the Citizen Potawatomi Nation. I also descend from the Osage Nation. I am a Deer Clan and I'm Thunder Clan. And so I'm here today to talk to you about tribal home studies. My experience definitely lies in home studies and working with foster parents and adoptive parents. I worked for 10 years in tribal child welfare direct practice um, with the Chickasaw Nation as well with my tribe, the Citizen Potawatomi Nation. And I really wish I had counted how many home studies I've written over the years, approved ones, denied ones, partial ones that didn't get completed. I think the number would be pretty high. As far as why I'm here today, I do some consulting work, and this is kind of the area that I really like talking about the most because I think home studies are a really important part of the process for protecting children. Um, but I am, like I said, I live in Oklahoma. I have a bachelor's degree in Native American Studies from the University of Oklahoma. My master's is from Southeastern Oklahoma State University, and that's in Native American leadership. And then I'm currently working on a doctorate in education from Southern Nazarene University, which is here in Oklahoma City. So we'll go ahead and get started, and I'll talk about the objectives. But I would definitely encourage you to use the chat if you can put your name, what tribe or agency you work for, and also what tribe you are, if that's different. I would love to, see who we have here today. And as she mentioned, please feel free to use the chat to ask questions. Um, I will do my best to monitor as well as she will help as well. We have a smaller group today, which I think is really great for learning. But I don't see any chats coming in yet, so hopefully the chat is working. um, for our first objective, we want to talk about what a home study is. So that's really important. What is this? What is the purpose of the home study? And also, we want to have a discussion of cultural dynamics. The home study process in general has certain things that you have to know as far as engaging with clients, but also if you are working with a Native American tribe, then we have even more cultural dynamics to really get into. As far as home studies go, there are interviewing styles and methods. So I would love to talk more about what those look like, and also the home study assessment category. So we'll kind of go into what makes up a home study. What are the different categories? Next slide. What is a home study? So one definition I have is it's a written assessment, not a biography. That's a very important difference. Of prospective foster or adoptive parent to evaluate if they're suitable to temporarily or permanently care for children. So again, I said it's an assessment. So when you think of a biography is just facts, right? It's just a summary of someone's life. But what you're doing in a home study is kind of a combination. So you are summarizing someone's life, and we'll talk about kind of what that looks like, what things are in a home study, but also we're assessing it. So you should have a portion of your home study where you're actually providing an assessment of this family, and if you think they would be suitable to care for children, or what their skills are, maybe what their deficits are. And it also contains the story of the family. So when you're writing a home study, it needs to be crafted in a way that it makes sense, right? Like there should be like a certain timeline, or like there really should be, it should be easy for someone to read and say, oh, I've read this home study. I really know what this family is like. Um, and it's also a way that you have to meet your own tribal policies, maybe tribal law, as well as if you have tribal state partnerships, maybe you place state custody children into your tribally approved homes, and the state has certain things that they need to be able to enter the family into their system. And also, we have federal requirements as well. A home study also provides an opportunity to educate the family on foster care and adoption. So this is your chance to interact and engage. It's not just something you check on off the list. It's actually a time that you can get to know your family better and they can build trust with you. And also, it develops the worker foster parent adopted relationship just further. So, in addition to getting to know each other and kind of, learn more, it's going to set the pace for how your relationship moves forward. Going forward. And then again, if you're on here and just logging in, if you can sign into the chat with your name, your agency, and your tribe, if you're a member of a tribe, that would be great. And then also, I'm curious if anyone has experience writing home studies. I didn't create a poll for this, but if you'd like to put in the chat if you've have any experience writing home studies, that would be really great information. Next slide. Who do we interview in a home study? And one thing I failed to mention was it can be called different things depending on the state, the region, the tribe. Home study is a pretty popular term here in Oklahoma, but also home assessment will be used as well. We kind of use the word home assessment to mean home safety check here. So it's interesting to see how different tribes and regions use different terminology. But for the purposes of this, I'm going to be saying home study. So as far as who we interview, so we have our applicants, right? So often we have a married couple or maybe a single individual or an unmarried couple. So you obviously need to interview those individuals because they'll be the ones caring for children. You think about when you're interviewing someone and you're interviewing people together, often there may be a time when we have one who speaks over the other one. So maybe if there's a husband and wife in the couple, the wife kind of answers for the husband because he's more quiet. And so that can be okay to a point, but you need to be able to hear from both applicants. And so how I normally schedule my home study visits is I go to the home 3 different times. And the reason for that is I'm doing usually about 8 to 9 hours of interviewing. It just kind of depends on the family and their history and their life. Some people have very just I want to say boring, but they haven't had a lot happen. Other people have dealt with a lot of trauma, or maybe they have a lot of siblings, and so it just kind of adds to the time. But when you're so my first visit, I typically will interview, if it's a couple, the couple together and ask them specific questions about their marriage, their relationship, why they want to be a foster parent. And when I do the individual interviews, those are the times when I'm asking them specifically about their childhood, maybe their medical condition, just all those things that can be addressed individually. But I do let the family read their home study once it's done. The only thing I do leave out are the references that I check because I want to keep those confidential so that the references feel like they can share information with me. And then if I do interview children, which we'll talk about, I don't want the family to know what the children said because sometimes they're not excited about their family fostering. They may share concerning information. And so I wouldn't want the parents to be able to see that. So with individually, it also can make a foster parent feel more comfortable just kind of sharing maybe a trauma they've experienced or a difficult time, but they definitely should know that their partner will be able to read that. And usually that's okay. It just makes it a little easier to share those things, I've found. And minor children in the home, this is really important. When I started in tribal child welfare in 2012, the tribe I worked with, I think they had a pretty good process for like the information that you gathered, but gathering the information wasn't really like defined. And so there was a home study questionnaire. It's like 20 something pages, very lengthy, but it was really detailed, but it was just given to the family to fill out. And there wasn't a lot of in-person interviewing done, and the children weren't interviewed at all. And so when we think about safety, who are the ones that can tell us the truth about what's going on in that home? It's going to be the children. So as far as interviewing minor children, that's something that you want to ensure privacy for anyone you interview, but especially the children. And if I like to meet with them in their room if I can, because then we can play a game together. They can show me their toys. They feel comfortable, and they're usually really proud to be in their room. But I've also done interviews where a child, if they feel kind of cornered in, they're a little shyer, it can help to go out on the swing or let them slide while we talk. And sometimes it can be a challenge to get attention, the child to kind of pay attention to what you're doing, but you just have to be really patient. If children are not old enough to be interviewed, so they're just maybe their baby or their speech is not elevated enough that you can have a conversation, then what I will put in the home study in the child interview section is my observation. So I'll put, what the child was dressed like, what type of interaction the parent had with the child. If the child asked for a cookie, how did the parent respond to that? And just kind of like describe like what I saw over my 3 visits. Adult children in the home. This is something that's really important too. So there may be children that are they're just older, like Native families. A lot of us live together for a lot of years, sometimes our entire life. And so there's a good chance that you are working with families that have adult children, whether they're 18 or 38. um, so speaking with them is it's critical because you're able to get information from them about their parents and if they think they're suitable. And also it's a safety check too to make sure that the adult child is appropriate to be in the home. Uh, Foster homes and adoptive homes may have adult roommates. I've had that happen before. They just have space in their home, they have enough room, then I don't really have a problem with it. Normally, it's just a better support for the child. And again, I was talking about privacy. So if I'm going to take a child into their room or I plan on it, then I tell the parent, these are the types of questions I'm going to be asking. And I would like to shut the door if you feel comfortable with that and if the child feels comfortable, if it's a small home. Again, if it's their space, I feel like I can leave the door open and not be overheard. That's fine. So just kind of take the cues of the family and then take into account what the space of the home is like to decide where to interview each person. And then you also want to make sure it's comfortable. You want, I mentioned we want children to be comfortable. We want the adults to be comfortable too. So I usually ask them, where would you like to sit? And they may like to sit at the kitchen table so they can kind of, sit up a little more. They might be where they want to be relaxed. So they want to sit in their recliner or some like in their living room. But also make sure you're comfortable. I think we've all gone into a home and sat down and basically fell into the floor because their couch doesn't have any more springs. um, and so then if you're sitting there, you're kind of like in the couch. That's not comfortable. So if you feel like it's easier for you to have like a table, maybe the kitchen or dining room area would be better for you, then suggest that. Just make sure that you're working together so that it's comfortable for both. And then this is a really good tip that I have is schedule your next visit before leaving. It can be really hard to sync up schedules. So if you're a person that does a paper calendar, bring your paper calendar. That's fine. If you use Outlook or use Google or a different calendar, like bring your phone in and have your calendar pulled up so that you can schedule. Even you can even have some dates pre-planned if you kind of know what their work schedule is, and that will make this process move forward faster and you're not playing phone tag trying to schedule your next visit. Next slide, please. As far as cultural considerations, I think it would not be a surprise here to anyone to have worked with families that have unique cultures. And working for tribes, people often think that we only work with Native American families from our specific tribe. And as most of you know, that's not true. We have a lot of tribes will approve foster and adoptive homes from other tribes. So both of the tribes I've worked for, you just had to be a member of a federally recognized tribe to qualify to apply to be a foster or adoptive parent. Also, we have some tribes will approve non-native homes because if there's a lack of available native homes in the area, or there's a certain community member, maybe you've transferred a case from state to tribal court and the state foster home maintained placement and you certified them as a tribal home. And then we also have our kinship and non-relative homes. So um, you're families you work with are going to have a variety of cultural connections. I may work with a citizen Potawatomi family that's extremely culturally connected, and they attend ceremony, they powwow, they eat traditional foods, they just interact with the world in a way that is very Potawatomiized, as we say. But you also may work with a tribal family that you're their only connection to their tribe. I know from my experience in Oklahoma, obviously is a little different than maybe some communities you're coming from, because all the tribes were removed here forcibly, and so we've kind of had to acclimate over time to living amongst each other and living like in a mixed communities, um, but with that comes a disconnection from tribal culture. So at Chickasaw Nation, when I worked there, I was Potawatomi working for Chickasaw Nation, so that's interesting in itself. But a lot of the families I worked with, they just didn't have any connection. And the reason they applied through the tribe was like, well, I'm a member of this tribe. I don't really participate in anything. I don't know much about my culture. I don't know my family, but I want to help Chickasaw children. Then that's going to be a unique way for you to help them connect. And picking up on nonverbal cues is really important when working with tribal families. You're the expert in your own community, so you know the ways that your community communicates. But often we may see some body language amongst tribal communities that's similar, such as not making eye contact. And that's funny because if that's like the most stereotypical thing to hear, but it is true. There are, if you are a social worker and you're in a home and you're intensely asking questions and staring them down, and you're not from their community, then that can be very uncomfortable. So you need to pay attention to the cues of your client so that they feel comfortable. Humor can also be used by your applicants to express difficulties or cover up pain. I'm the worst at laughing at the worst time. And it's not because I don't take something seriously or because I think a trauma is funny, but it's just kind of a way that my family interacts. And it's probably a coping mechanism, but also it's a way that I communicate. And so people always tell me, even when I'm like upset or in a bad mood, I'm still laughing. I was like, that's just what we do as Native people. And so if you're here today and you're not a part of a tribe, or maybe you're new to working with tribal families, just know that kind of clients feeling uncomfortable answering questions or laughing at a time that you think it's really not funny, it could just be a way of communication. There's also a distrust in tribal or state workers that can occur. And so I think it could be unsaid, it goes unsaid that tribal families and states that don't have a great history, which is why we have the Indian Child Welfare Act, correct? And so when they hear DHS, I hear the DHS a lot, tribal families don't have positive interactions or positive view of state workers. Tribes, it can be the same. There could be a distrust because a family may have been investigated or had children placed into foster care previously and maybe lost their rights to those children. So now they don't trust their tribe. They don't want anything to do with their tribe. On the other hand, there are families who they want their tribe. As soon as a state worker makes contact, I'm this tribe. Call my tribe. You can't come in until you call my tribe. So you may really experience a variety of how people view working with tribes and states. And so keep in mind that just because you have good intentions and work for the tribe doesn't mean they'll necessarily trust you, and you'll have to take steps to build that. And people can be very protective of their family and their story. I was just talking with someone the other day about my grandma, who I was like, I don't even know. Like, there's something in our family history I know about, but I don't really know much about it, and it's something I know I can't really talk to her about. Now, it's something that if she were to have to be approved as a foster adoptive home, it would need to be disclosed because it's unavoidable. But I'm like, she would not want to share that. And so just kind of think about in your own life things that you may not want to share, or family members, that can definitely happen to clients. And so have respect for that, but also you can take the time to explain to them why you need that information. Next slide. And again, please feel free to use the chat to share your experiences or any questions. Talking more about cultural considerations. When you are working with foster adoptive families from tribal communities, think about their ceremonial involvement. What are the types of things that they do? And what would a child potentially experience? So, in Potawatomi ceremonies, I won't share specific details, but we do smoke ceremonial tobacco that we pray over, and we share a pipe when we smoke that. And if a child is coming from a background where there was drug use, they may not understand the difference between a ceremonial pipe and a different type of pipe, maybe that they saw other people utilize. Um, and they could tell their parent or tell their social worker, well, they were smoking a pipe. They were smoking. I know they were smoking marijuana because I know what marijuana looks like. And really, they had sage in a bowl and they were smudging with it. And so you want to make sure that you have documented in their home study what types of things that are involved in their ceremony to the level that they're comfortable. Um, Another thing is there are, as far as like Sundance ceremonies, there may be piercing that occurs. Now, while I know that you're told not to be looking, children see things, right? Or they hear about different practices. And so it's really important to make sure that you have an understanding. So if a question comes forward from a the child's caseworker or a parent, then you can say, oh, well, they weren't smoking meth. They smoke tobacco in ceremony, and this is a part of their culture. Because this just having this information in there takes away any mystery from that could happen. And also, maybe your families you work with, they go for 2 weeks in the summer to ceremonies. So, like, I was just in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan for the Potawatomi gathering of our nations. And I was a foster parent, I just closed, but if I had a child placed with me in foster care, I would take them. So I would want to know if my foster parent would have like certain things planned that they were going to go to, because if they can't take the children for some reason, it's good to prepare that and have a plan in advance. I talked again about non-native families caring for tribal children. So for a variety of reasons, whether they're a relative or whether your tribe will approve non-native homes or just has in the past, um, keep in mind that they may not have a lot of information about culture. They may not know about, what happens during a young girl's first moon. They may need to know some of this. So this is your chance again to build that relationship with a family and educate them on the teachings that they would need to know to care for these children. And each person, regardless of their ethnicity, has their own unique culture. So everyone experiences culture differently. They have different family cultures and histories, and so be aware of respecting that. Next slide. As far as home study categories, so you'll commonly see like an agency will have a template. And these are some of the categories you might see. We're going to go into some of these a little bit more, like motivation, childhood relationships. But there's also going to be areas where you're basically going to be using a questionnaire to ask and gather all of this information. So, as far as you see here, school district, for the tribes I work for, our application asks, what school district do you live in? So, that's how I would gain that information. I would double check it. Um, as far as physical and emotional health, I would use a medical exam that my tribe required foster parents to get from their doctor. And then religious and spiritual beliefs, that's something I would ask in their home. So it's kind of a combination of your taking paperwork they've turned in, conversations you've had, and interviews in their home to create this document. And so these are some of the categories that you'll see. There's probably some that are missing that maybe you would cover, but these will kind of give you an idea of what type of things are in home studies. Next slide. The motivation and purpose. This is typically what you'll see at the near the beginning of a home study. The first page may have the contact information for the family, their demographics, their dates of birth, where their addresses. But you'll see why a section on why they have decided to open their home to foster or adopt. And also, what is their purpose in doing this? What are their skills? What do they think they can bring to the table to help traumatized children? Um, when you're working with kinship and relative homes, um, it, here in Oklahoma, we approve them fully as a home. We typically don't just place a child there and then don't complete their home study. So you're doing this process often with kinship and relative homes too. So it might seem obvious, right? That, well, I'm doing this because I want to take care of my nephew. But they may have their own perspectives about why they're doing this and what their skills are, which is, well, I was in foster care as a child, so I feel like I want to provide the a good experience like I had, or maybe give an experience I didn't have to my nephew. So getting that insight can help you learn more about the family and also see, what their strengths are and how they're going to carry this forward. And it's a time to address expectations about placement. I will say, that looking at your onboarding process for a foster home is really kind of, I could probably talk about that for like a whole day about looking at what information is in your application. How do you communicate? What are you gathering before? And in my experience, the application is a good place for people to put what their placement preferences are. So, are they interested in one child? Are they interested in male or female? Um, what number of children, but also what type of children would they not take? And some agencies have like a child's needs list or a placement list, and I've seen this before, where you can mark yes, no, or maybe, which is like kind of like, I know it's helpful for gathering information, but it's also like kind of limiting, and it's scary to people to see sexual behavior, fire starting. Like they see all of these things and can be like, oh my gosh. And so I actually at my tribe, I when I came to work there a few years ago, I was able to kind of revamp all the paperwork, and that's something that I took out because I was like, you know what, those are things I can talk about in person with them, but I do want to have a section that I can gather, and this is why, to make sure their expectations are accurate. Because if a family on their application puts they only want to adopt a newborn baby, well, we work in foster care, so that's not really what we do. The tribes I've worked for do not have private adoption units or anything like that. I know some tribes may have, especially some tribes that are larger, might have some more involvement in that, but it's not anything that the tribes I've worked for have. So if someone's turning in an application and says, I want to adopt a newborn baby, I don't want to foster, well, that's not a realistic expectation. So ideally, you've already addressed that before you get to the point of the home study, but I understand that doesn't always happen, and it's possible you weren't the one that onboarded their application. You're just the one writing the home study. That's your role in your agency, or maybe that worker left and you're taking over. So it's really crucial in your first conversations to make sure that they understand what adoption through foster care looks like, and that it's really not likely to adopt a newborn because most of the time the goal is reunification. And then when children are adopted, it's typically their foster parent, which can be a relative, but the person fostering them almost all of the time is one who adopted the child because they're willing to adopt younger, right? So keep in mind that this is a teaching time as well. It's not just a time to gather information. Like I said, it's not a biography, it's an assessment, and also it's an engagement tool. Next slide. Another important part of a home study is looking into a person's childhood background. Your childhood can shape your views on life. It can also give the foster care worker kind of an insight into their perspectives on life. So, some of the questions that I ask, what was your early childhood like? So, that's kind of we're going to talk about question types. That's like an open ended question, and that's a good question to start. And they may go everywhere. They're like, oh, well, I grew up, I was an army brat, so I lived here, there, and everywhere. Or they may start with like, well, when I was 1 year old, this is what I did when I was two, when I was three. um, so it can open up in a variety of ways, but it's a good time for them to start. And then you can pick up on like where you want to go with what they told you. I always ask, were your parents ever separated or divorced? Because they may be talking about their childhood and they're just telling you, oh, I played softball and we went to church camp, or we did this, we went on trips, but they don't tell you about that time for 4 years that was really hard when their parents were separated. And that does impact their life. Did your family spend time together? What kind of activities did you guys do? Who were the people that met your developmental needs? Because there's times when the maybe the mother was in school and she worked, and the father stayed home, and so the father is who was there, or maybe an auntie or grandma lived in the home, and they're the ones that really were the most nurturing and the most there for them, and maybe they're raised by their grandparents. What were unhappy memories? This is really important for those people that are just like happy go lucky, because you want to give them the opportunity to think about that, and ask, was there anything scary that ever happened to you or traumatic? And you can actually find out information that could be safety risk. That scary thing that happened might have been abuse from a relative that they now have a relationship with and would come around a child in foster care. And so you have to assess those relationships to make sure that it would be okay. But that can be a concern. Um, I have asked about all kinds of things with childhood, but it can be difficult for people to speak about traumas from childhood. So whenever you're interviewing, always start with, we may talk about some things that could be hard for you to discuss. If you need to take a break or take a moment, I completely understand, and I want to make sure that you feel supported. And I've had a lot of people cry during their home studies because um, it could be a little bit re-traumatizing to talk about trauma, but sometimes it's just emotional. So they're okay, but it just brings up emotions to discuss their relationship with their mother who passed away, or with a relationship that ended badly. And also ask, what were the best memories? I really like that question because I like to hear kind of like what they look back on their childhood and how they would describe it. Next slide. I did want to share. So the pictures that I have are all pictures of my family. Many of them are at on our allotted land, where we still maintain and have ceremony. So just wanted to share that these are some Potawatomi folk from Oklahoma. Our family relationships, these have to be assessed because we have to see, can our applicants develop, maintain, and sustain relationships? If I'm not saying they have to be, have the most friends in the world, but it is a way to see, are they forgiving? Are they, how do they interact with people? Are they flexible in their relationships? And then you can identify relationships for safety issues. This has happened more times than I can count, that a foster parent, I was asking them about their parent or their siblings, and they bring up that, well, my brother, we're really close. He lives a couple hours away. We talk every day, but he is an alcoholic, or he has a drug addiction. And so that's a safety issue right there, because children have already been through trauma and often have been in situations where they're around people abusing alcohol or using substances, and we don't want to re-traumatize a child or put them back in that situation. So you may have to develop a safety plan, which is, the foster parent agrees that uh, they will not bring children around that person at all. So maybe that they tell you their sibling was arrested for child abuse, or they just got out of prison for something very serious, and they're not really in a good place, then you might want to make a safety plan, which you can use your home study as that. If you let your families review your home study, you can put that in your like summary area, which is they agreed that it's not safe for children in foster care to be around their mother, and they will not do that, or something to that effect. So asking about relationships with siblings, parents is really critical, because sometimes they're not maybe making the best decision on having a relationship. Next slide. And I think so. I had some videos. For some reason, they're not working, which is okay. But I did do a training for Capacity Building Center for Tribes. So I've modified this. And Esther Ann, she works for the University of Southern Maine. She was a really good actor. I will say that. So we did some role playing, and I was the interviewer, and Esther was my foster adoptive parent I was approving. And so I will email out, I have everyone's email. So I'm going to send out a resource that I developed with Capacity Building Center for Tribes that actually has links to 6 videos that you can watch to see some mock interviewing, and see it. Some of them I apologize. You might see me smiling or laughing because she was cracking me up. We tried to edit as much as we could, but she was like very, very into like being a difficult client. So it was very interesting. But this video I talked about so her plan for fostering children was going to be that she didn't like the daycare in town. And, or maybe a situation there's not a daycare in the town you live in. So her mother was going to be the one to watch the children for a couple hours after school um, until yeah, until she got off work. So I was like, well, so I brought up, I was like, well, we actually just talked about your mom, and you mentioned your mom has had a long-standing prescription drug abuse history. And she's like, well, she hasn't used drugs in a while. And I tell my kids, like, if grandma starts acting too sleepy or you see grandma take a pill, you need to call me. Well, that's probably not going to be a good plan for a child care option. So as in addition to just learning about what the relationship is like and who the person is, you get to see, are there safety issues in this relationship? Okay, next slide. Intimate relationships. We'll talk about couples right now. So they're married or maybe they're unmarried, but they're in a partnership. You're assessing it for safety and stability. And here are some questions that I asked to help me get a better understanding of what their relationship is like. What are the strongest parts of your relationship? What do you think are the best parts of it? And usually people answer pretty well. Communication is a pretty popular one, or they're my best friend. I feel like I can tell them anything. We are a partner, we're in a partnership. Asking what struggles that someone has. This is really crucial too. We're not just looking to gather positive information, we're looking to gather the truth. And what the truth is that couple struggle. So what struggles do you currently have? And some families don't really have any. They're in a good, they're kind of in a good pace in life, which is why they've applied to foster and adopt. They feel like they're stable. So we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs. They're at that self-actualization level to where they have all of their needs met, physical, emotional, safety, everything. And then now they're ready to give back. So if someone doesn't have a current struggle, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but what you'll want to look at instead is what struggles have you faced in the past. Now, everyone has faced struggles in the past. Financial struggles seem to be kind of a theme of something that I've noticed in all the families that I've worked with is when they were younger, they didn't have as much money. Now, maybe they made some financial decisions that weren't really good for them. They had a lot of credit cards. It could be that one person was unfaithful in the beginning of their relationship, and people will tell you that. I had someone tell me that he was more like sexual than his wife, and I was like, I didn't need to know that, but thanks. But I took that information. I was like, well, how do you guys overcome that? And he was like, well, we just have, he's like, we just work together to make sure we're both happy. And I'm like, really didn't need to know it, but there I have it. I guess I'll put it in the home study. But he was just being honest, and I appreciated it. But how do they overcome that in the past? Like, what steps did they take? And also, what's your plan to prevent that from happening again? Because sometimes their struggle is something that could reoccur. This is my favorite question in all of my questions. Describe the worst argument you ever had. And it usually involves in-laws. I'll just be honest with you. But one couple that I worked with, they made me laugh because I asked them, and she immediately looked at him and shook her head, and I was like, "Oh my gosh!" And I guess they've only had one really bad argument in their 2 or 3 years of marriage, and it was when they were planning their wedding. And she talked about, she's like, "Oh, I really want to have a classy wedding," and he said, "Well, we're not classy." So that did not settle well with her. And so now they can laugh about it. And so they said how they resolved it was, she just shared, she's like, that offends me because she's like, I don't feel trashy. And he's like, I didn't mean we're trashy. And so really it was kind of the way he communicated. And he was just trying to say, he's simple. He didn't want anything too extravagant. And so it was a communication issue. But it was a pretty funny one. And ask people, how do you make decisions? So how you make decisions in life? Like, does one person kind of the leader? I know sometimes you'll see kind of a balance in relationships where one person is the one that kind of like carries everything forward. Maybe they're an equal partnership. So you want to see what that is like. And then asking about their shared interests, hobbies, and activities. Often when you're talking with them, they're going to talk about, oh, we do this with our kids. We're always going to sporting events, but what are their individual things that kind of bring them together that are similar? And then for single individuals, ask about their social life and their dating life. Let them know what the policy that your agency has for assessing partners. So so for example, both tribes I've worked for, I wrote the policy for the second tribe, but I kind of went off the first tribe's policy. If anyone 18 or older stays in the home 30 or more calendar days out of the year, they have to be fingerprinted. So that's a policy we had. So I would want them to know that. It's like, okay, so you're not married and you have a boyfriend, they live a few hours away, so you see them, they come down like every other weekend. So that easily adds up to 30 days. So you want to fingerprint them. But I kind of I like the practice of, if they're in a relationship, doing all of the same paperwork that you would if they live together, or if you were approving that person to also be a foster parent. So maybe you're not getting all of the details, but as far as like the background checks, I would recommend that. Um, I had well, I'm now leaving. I'm not sure if I'm into that. I'm my last day with my tribe is tomorrow, and I'm going to work for the University of Denver. But one of my now former foster parents, she has had a few relationships in the times that we've been working together, and she like uses me to help vet them. So she's like, okay, what did you find now? Because I use online records checks for any applicant that I'm assessing, and you can find histories of speeding tickets, of arrests, of protective orders. Oklahoma actually has two really good websites to find information on any court case, civil or criminal, like public record. And so one, I told her that I found a protective order from when he was 18, that the woman he ended up marrying, her dad filed against him, and it was dismissed and all of this. And so I got the police reports, and I shared it with her because it was public, and she broke up with him. I was like, whoa. Because it ended up not it was kind of like it wasn't anything too serious, honestly, because you can file a protective order. Anyone can. It didn't have much concerning information in there. But you will want to let them know that if you are dating someone, here are the steps that the tribe or the agency has to take for us to assess them. So if you're signing up to be a foster parent and you're single, just know you need to tell me as soon as you get into a relationship, or if someone wants to start staying the night, especially if they have a child in their home. And so right now you might be thinking, I'm not sure how I would handle that. I haven't had that before. This is kind of your opportunity to start thinking about it. And you may not have a written policy at your tribe. That's understandable. And a lot of tribes don't, but it might be time to look at thinking about what are the things that we can have, so a foster adoptive parent would know from the beginning, here are the steps you need to take. And that eliminates a lot of safety issues, like them not telling you about a relationship and it turns out that person is not really safe to be around. Then you could say, well, we talked about this, you knew you should have told me this in the beginning. Okay, next slide. So children of applicants, you want to examine the relationship an applicant has with their minor children and their adult children. So I have a scenario here I'm going to read. Dakota has applied to become a foster parent. He is healthy, financially stable, and has experience in working with traumatized children. He appears to be an excellent person to care for children. He reported he has an 11-year-old son he does not visit. When the child was 2 years old, Dakota separated from the child's mother. He has paid child support since the separation but has had no visitation. Dakota reported he has not sought any visitation or custody. His reasoning was he was immature at the time and moved on with his life. So I would like to invite anyone to come off mute and share what their thoughts are about, would you approve Dakota as a foster parent given these facts, or if you'd like to use the chat. Again, he is healthy, financially, he really meets all the criteria to be a foster parent, but he has a child he doesn't have a relationship or visit, although he pays child support. And I'm just kind of curious if anyone would be interested in sharing their thoughts about this. or if you've had this situation. Okay, that's okay if not. um, but I have this is one that they're usually mixed. There's mixed feedback about. So again, you still have time to pop up, type in the chat if you have an idea. But okay, I would be concerned about his lack of involvement in his own child's life. Yes, I agree. So really, there's two camps, which is, well, it doesn't really matter like what's going on with that situation. He's approvable. He's stable. Um, he has experience. He's been a child welfare worker, whatever it may be. But then there is the other camp that's like, well, if you're not even taking care of your own child, then why are you interested in taking care of someone else's child? And again, this isn't to be judgmental, but this is something you really should dig into and assess, because what will be his commitment to a child if he doesn't visit his child now? And he reported there's not really any good reason. He just moved on with his life. Um, and when looking at your application process, I put into my tribe's application to list children in the home, children outside the home. Because if you just put list children, he may leave off that other child because he doesn't take care of it, right? Um, but I have had this happen with two different kinship homes where now, when you're approving a relative home to take placement, you do the best you can with what you have, right? So they fill out like we still made them do the application and the required paperwork and all of that to get emergency placement. But there wasn't a lot of time to vet the information before placing relative children in the home. So I had a situation where a lot came out in the home study process, a whole lot. And it was an aunt, or they were an aunt and uncle. And it turned out that the aunt had a child. She had an affair on her husband. They're married. And she had a child with someone else. And I didn't really notice it at the time because I had one of my staff go out and assess the home, but that child had a different last name than everyone else. And it didn't really stand out to anyone because it was a really like crazy day. And then the uncle, he cheated on her and had a child with her best friend. And so the situation with that was just kind of like, wow. And they told us the truth, but it wasn't until after they already had placement. Um, so like, man, how do we navigate this? And so I asked the uncle, is like, okay, what's your relationship with your child? With her best friend. And he's like, well, I don't have one. I've never met him. He's like, I do. He's like, we have a child support order through tribal court and I pay. He's like, and I was like, well, can you visit? And he said, well, I could, but I don't choose to have a relationship. That's just, again, not to be judgmental, but it really makes you think about like commitment. So, I just know these things can pop up, and I would recommend, sharing the scenario with your foster care coworkers, maybe if your supervisor or staff, to say, how would we handle this? Because when I worked at Chickasaw Nation, my director he was not okay if someone didn't take care of their own kids or had, and again, he didn't even lose custody, like because of a child welfare situation. He just didn't desire to take care. And so my boss is like, we're not approving people that will do that. So I'm like, okay, and do what you're told. And he also had, we talk about relationships. You're looking at someone's relationship history and history of marriages. If they have been married 6 times in the last 6 years, that could show some stability issues, and that could cause issues for a child that is living there and they see all these people come in and out, right? Because the foster parents act as the mom and dad, like they're providing that role. And if they constantly see someone leaving, then that's not really like a necessarily providing them a like experience with stable relationships. So again, like, I use the home studies and assessment. Sometimes you may feel like you're being judgmental, but it's really important because it's about safety and stability. And then you want to ask the parents about their own children. I always do this. And I say, what's your child's strengths? What are their skills, struggles? What's their medical history? Because when you interview a child, they're not necessarily going to be able to tell you everything, or they may leave out. They don't tell you about, I had surgery when I was a baby. I had open heart surgery, whatever it might be. They may not even know that. Ask them about their criminal involvement. And then what are their perceived thoughts about foster care and adoption? What do they think their child thinks about it, because they may tell you, oh my gosh, they're so excited. They told me that they can't wait to be a brother or have a brother. And then you interview the child and they're like, no, like I heard my mom say that. I've never said that. I do not want a kid here. I do not want to share my room. Um, and you can really gain valuable information from the children. Next slide. The summary and recommendation. I talked about this previously, but this is where you summarize the strengths, skills, and abilities of your applicants. So, an example, Taylor has a sincere motivation to become a foster parent. Oh, it skipped a slide. We can go back one. Okay. One more up. I think it's just being a little twitchy. So she has a motivation to become a foster parent, and I shared that she's a special education teacher with special training. She has also taught foster children in her 20 years. So she has experience working with children that do have special needs and children that are in special education classes, sometimes, have just more profound needs than children. Well, the same can be said about children that are placed into foster care. They have more profound needs than a child who has not experienced trauma. Taylor has also uh, reported that she understands and has compassion for families and that she wants to bridge. And so those are really great tools for someone to have, or great skills for someone to have. And she said, I understand the importance of the parent child relationship. I will do my part in helping a child maintain their family connections. Whenever I can, I use quotes in the home study for something that an applicant said. And the reason for that is that way the person reading this can see directly from their words what they said. Um, and then I also make a recommendation. It's recommended Taylor be approved as a foster parent. So the way that I have done home studies is that if I am the one writing the home study, I'm making a recommendation, and then whoever is the person above me, so my supervisor, that may be a manager, a director, it might be a tribal leader or a tribal council member, depending on how your tribe does the process of approving homes. I want to make a recommendation and then have someone else approve it. I just think that's two sets of eyes. That's someone else looking and saying, yes, I agree, they are appropriate. Um, so if you right now your tribe, like you're the foster care worker and you just approve them, maybe think about that process and kind of reimagining that to be like not just like they're approved, but it's like I'm recommending it and then someone with a little more authority approved it, and that's showing that kind of that trust in that family. Include weaknesses, and if you're concerned about something in there, um, they so I have had people that I think they're really great, but there's also a couple things about like they have been married a lot of times. And then share in there kind of like how you mitigate that concern. It's like, yes, they have been married 5 times, but they have learned from the situation, or they were in an abusive relationship. They know the steps now not to be in it. Whatever, there's going to often be concerns with a family, and so it doesn't have to be a big concern. It could be something small. It could be a medical condition, like maybe they've only been in remission from cancer for a year, and you say they have regular visits with their doctor, and so something you think that a judge, an attorney, maybe a worker that's helping select an adoptive family for a child might have concerns about. This is your chance to eliminate any concern about that and advocate for approval for the family. And not all families receive a recommendation for approval, but often when you get to the home study part of this process, they're most likely going to be approved because they have, at that point, you should have already received their criminal history results. You should have already been looking at their finances. Maybe even check some references already, and everything looks good. But then you interview their teenage child and they say, well, my mom's abusive, or my mom, she hates children, like whatever it might be. You get information. And I have had I personally discovered information that I'm like, I am not going to be able to approve this family. So one pretty crazy situation happened to me last year, And there was a family I was approving, and they were 3 hours from Shawnee, like a very long drive. And they were an older married couple, and so they just had a lot of life I had to interview them about. And I went to their home 3 times. I put in just the driving was like 18 hours, and then in their home I was there 9 hours. I had registered them for fingerprinting, and there was just issues. We used the state of Oklahoma, and there were just some issues with it getting done on time. I was waiting for results, and then they're like, "Oh, you have to resend this paper," and it was just like with COVID and everything, just a really weird time. And normally I would have had their fingerprint results around the time I went to their first visit. Well, I didn't get them until I had already completed their last visit. And I had on the application, I asked, do you have any child welfare, or do you have any child welfare history or criminal history? Have you ever, and the specific question is, have you ever been arrested or convicted of a crime? And then on the background check forms, at least here in Oklahoma, that's another spot that they answer is, have you ever been arrested or convicted of a crime? And the the male applicant had marked no on both of those, gave no context or clues that he had ever been arrested or investigated for a crime. So I'm getting their home study written up, and it's like 20 something pages. It's so long. And I get the fingerprint results, and he had been arrested for homicide. So, which is just a safety issue in itself. But I typically, as long as they haven't, said that they have any history. And then he's lived in Oklahoma for like 20 or 30 years. Well, our policy is you only have to check out of state, like criminal history, if they've lived out of state in the last 5 years, but your fingerprints cover the whole nation. So we just kind of leave it at that. So that was kind of wild, and I ended up denying them. And I already had their home study written, and so basically I just left all that together, because if they were going to make a complaint to my supervisor or to tribal leadership, then I actually had everything about their life already written. And just in my summary and recommendation, I'm like, he was dishonest about being arrested for a crime. The crime was homicide. This is a situation that occurred. He was not convicted. But regardless, he was dishonest and trying to hide it. And he's like, well, I didn't think you needed to know that. Okay. And he said, I wasn't even arrested. And I said, were you? I said, well, you were fingerprinted. And so that was an interesting situation. And there's other times that, like I said, you talk to a child and you decide, or you're talking with a family and you feel like maybe one of the applicants isn't really emotionally stable right now to take care of an abused child. You may end up recommending denial. Um, and there's a question, do we know anything about her experience with Native children, if any? That's a great question. In any background in trauma-informed care, for example, she may need some specific training. And this is a really great area to expand upon that. So this is like obviously a very short snippet. My summary and recommendation is usually about half a page. Sometimes it can be a little longer. And then I'll definitely talk more about like this couple has been in a marriage for 10 years. It appears to be stable and loving. They are members of the Citizen Potawatomi Nation. They are connected to their culture. They plan on bringing children to our yearly gathering. They participate in monthly full moon prayer ceremonies, and so for any female children they have, they will bring them into that. Also, it could be that they don't have a connection to their tribe or their culture, but they're willing to reach out to people, and they would like assistance from the child welfare program to connect to different events and activities. Maybe they are taking, so like last night I did one of our online language courses for the Potawatomi language. And so include those things in there too, to show that maybe they don't have that experience, or maybe they do, but either way that there is a sincere passion to make sure children are connected. And then, yeah, you can also recommend, say, that this family is not Native American, they're not connected to the community, but they will be caring for children from our community. So, the Taylor has agreed that she will come to our tribal gathering, or that she will attend these cultural classes that are taking, or maybe there's your summer powwows going on. And then, so that's kind of the summary and recommendation section. And we'll go to the next slide. So let's talk about interviewing methods. and being engaging. So your relationship with your interviewee is going to be unique depending on their personality, their willingness to be engaging themselves. But always share the plan and the purpose for interviewing. This is really important to do when you're first setting up your first visit, and continue this conversation each time, because when you start talking about hard things, they can maybe get a little hesitant, but just remind them that the reason I'm asking you these questions about something bad that happened in your childhood is because I have to make sure you've properly dealt with those things to be able to take care of a child. And yes, I will email out the slides. I can do that after. Um, and I would love to, again, if anyone has specific questions, you'll have my email after this session. And then ensure a comfortable setting. So I kind of talked about that already, but if you want to be engaging, they need to feel like comfortable. So don't be sitting too close to them or like leaning in too far. Give them enough space, but don't be too far away to where you're like yelling across the room. And I've had this happen before and been like, hey, is it okay if I grab this kitchen chair, kind of move, over here so we can hear each other better? Um, Appear non-judgmental. So people may tell you things like, well, an issue we had is I cheated on my husband with his best friend, and you're like, "Oh my gosh." But, it's like if you ever heard the saying, be like a duck. So on the surface, above the surface, you're calm. Underneath is where you're paddling. so try to keep a pleasant face. Use your emotions appropriately as far as like body language. But you may hear things that you're like, dang, and you're in your head, you're kind of judging, but keep in mind that's not what we're here for. It's to gather the information and see how it fits into the big picture. Complimenting the home is a great idea, but be genuine. Don't just make up something. But they may have a couch that you really like, or maybe they got a new TV and you're like, oh my gosh, I love that. Or, I just bought that same iPad, whatever it may be. If you like gardening, you can talk about. You're like, oh, you planted roses. I just planted yellow roses. Do you have any tips for how I can, keep them pruned? I don't garden. I don't know. That's probably not a terminology to use, but just ask them for advice. Just look at that's a way to engage, and then acknowledge their family pets. And so I know some of you on here are thinking, I don't want animals near me. But it really is an important part of the assessment process first, because you need to engage with their animals to make sure they're safe, and make sure that they're not, ferocious or going to harm a child. And so you need to like look at their animals. I always, if nothing else, sometimes they're like, they have their big dog in the cage, like she will jump all over you, and I don't want that to happen. But as long as you can go over to the kennel and interact and kind of see, and then you may ask them, well, can you just let them run around outside? And then also just acknowledge them, on the other hand, is engaging. So these are my dogs. The top one, this is Ghost. I call him Ghost Man. And I've had him since he was a baby. This picture, he was modeling for our tribe's gift shop. So he has a Minot Namosh collar on. It means good dog. And then the bottom one, this is Sage. And she was rescued. I just got her a couple months ago. And I will tell you what, if someone was telling me, oh, Ghost is so handsome, Sage is so sweet, it would make me feel really good and proud, and it would engage me in the conversation. And so, but some of you don't like animals, and that's okay, but you still need to try to interact the best you can. And also, again, just giving those compliments and acknowledgments is a way to make them feel more comfortable and like that you actually want to be there and want to get to know them. Next slide. There's different types of questions that we ask. So this is pretty simple. We have closed-ended questions. These are getting a specific response. How old are you? How long have you been married? How many children do you have? Where do you live? Easy peasy. Next slide. Open-ended questions. This is really where we're gathering a lot of information. This is where we're getting things that we wouldn't know from an application. We're getting a broad range of information. We're getting feelings, emotions about things, and perceptions. And some are positive, some are negative. So we talked about childhood. This is going to be, your childhood section is going to be very open-ended. So it's not a lot of yes and no. It's more like them telling you open-ended answers. Why are you interested in becoming a foster parent? What are your views on discipline? And then you'll pretty much always need to follow up with open-ended questions. Often they tell you something that should trigger another question for you. That happens very often. And if you have written home studies before and you're kind of thinking, oh, like I didn't know, when you get to writing it, you're like, oh, I should have asked more about that. That's okay. It happens. But try to think in the moment of, like they said, so I have an example here. You said you and your wife struggled with finances in the past. Tell me more about that. So if they just say, yeah, we used to have money problems, well, you need to know more about it. You said your relationship with your brother is fine. What does fine mean? Because depending on how they said the word fine, it could be like, oh, it's fine, like no big deal. Or they could say it's fine, I guess. It's like, well, why is it just fine? And maybe it's because, they have a drug addiction problem and so they are distant. And those are things that you're going to need to know. Next slide. There are going to be tough questions. And so, as a foster care worker, I will say this, I didn't really get any training, which is why I've developed this today. um, I didn't really get any like training on like how to ask tough questions. And then my degrees are not in social work, so I didn't even have that training in school. So it was definitely on the job. But you have to talk about really difficult things. People have experienced abuse and trauma, especially in Indian country. We have a lot of trauma that we experience for many reasons. And you have to assess if they have overcome those traumas enough to where they can take care of a child and not be re-traumatized themselves or re-traumatize a child. Um, I have worked with applicants who, it's mainly been women who have been sexually abused, and they were a child, and it was usually by a relative or someone close to the family. And they told me, well, I don't want to take care of a child that's been sexually abused because I think it would just be hard for me. Well, um, as we know, children in foster care have been sexually abused, and sometimes we don't know it until after they've been placed into the person's home because that just wasn't revealed by the child, or they were removed for something else and it's revealed later. Um, and so this is a time when you really have to step in and say, okay, do you feel like, how would you handle that if you take placement of a child and find out later that they had been sexually abused? And I had a situation occur where one of my foster parents was in that situation. She did not want to take a child because she was still, she said she still did regular counseling just to maintain, but she did feel like it could maybe re-trigger some feelings. Well, she had placement of a child, and that child had been sexually touched by a church youth leader that was in foster care and in her home. And so that was just a very shocking situation. And so because I knew her history and I knew this would be hard for her, I was able to step in and intervene and make sure that she was stable and had the resources that she needed. So the thing about being a foster care worker is plan for the unexpected, because you can say, oh yeah, we're not going to place children with you that have a history of being sexually abused, but you can't guarantee that. Like, you can't guarantee it won't happen to them after they're in care, or that it won't come out after they've been placed into care. And as difficult as this is to talk about, it is a reality. Um, you have to guide and support them if they're struggling to answer the questions, because you need the information. It might be that you feel like, okay, they're really processing this right now. I think let's just take a break, and I'm coming back tomorrow anyway. Let's kind of readdress tomorrow. But it's really a good idea to try in the moment to go ahead and have those conversations. Um, you need to know, because we're placing kids there. Next slide. And one more slide. So this is another video. I had a few videos in here, but we're kind of taking up a lot of time anyway, so we're good. Okay, so another interviewing method that you have to become skilled at is redirection. Oh my gosh, I have heard so many stories of people's lives that had nothing to do with anything I needed to know, but it was a way for me to build a relationship with them, and so that's okay. So one way to redirect is summarize what they've said to you and then move forward. So maybe they're just talking about their new tractor and it's this and that. You can say, oh, I really liked hearing about your tractor. That's pretty cool. But let's go ahead and talk about your health history now. So just kind of segue. Or now that we've just discussed your relationship with your stepfather, we're going to talk about your relationship with your siblings. So you may ask a question like, yes, or like a closed-ended question. How old is your mother? And they're like, well, let me think about that. She was born at home, out on the prairie, and it was like she's like 86. She could, and it's like I just needed just an answer, just an estimate. So one thing I'll do to kind of redirect is if they're not sure, I'm like, you're actually going to get a chance to read your home study later. And so if you can kind of give me your closest estimate right now, we'll make sure that we update that in the end of the process. So, or they'll forget, like, I'll ask, like, what does your sibling, what kind of type of work do they do? And they're like, well, I'm not really sure. I don't really know, where they live right now. I can't remember. We haven't talked in a couple months. Just redirect and get that information later, so you're not sitting there wasting time of them trying to think of something they probably won't remember. Next slide. And one more. Confrontation. Now, this is necessary as a home study interviewer because there are going to be times that an interviewee does not want to answer the questions, or they're not being honest. I will say relatives are usually the ones that you come across this more with because they have so much stress on their plate. They already unexpectedly had to take care or take placement of a grandchild or another relative, and then they're trying to take off work because they're trying to go to court, and then they have this like dual role of being the relative of the child and of the parent, so they're trying to support everyone in this situation, or maybe the parent is giving them a hard time. So just know that not everyone is going to be like the perfect home study interviewee, because they may not even want to do this or not understand why. So one thing that could happen is you ask them about their last, their relationship with their ex-wife, and you may say, well, you appeared to be irritated when I asked you about your ex-wife. Is there a reason for that? Or you're not wanting to discuss the reason you attended mental health counseling last year. I want to respect your feelings and privacy, but also this is information that's really critical to the application process. And I've had people say, I just don't think it's anyone's business. Like, I don't think I should have to share that. And that's understandable. Self privacy is important, but also if it's something that could be a safety risk, we have to know it. I'll just say, like, well, unless you tell me more about this, like, we can't move forward because we actually have, now that you've told me you are in mental health counseling, in our policy, we do a behavioral health reference. And so I actually need to speak with your therapist. um, but yeah, it can be, that can be a difficult part of the home study process, is when you're being confronted. So if you know in advance that you have a client that's being quote unquote difficult, or they're experiencing difficulties, then try to be as prepared for that as you can, especially if you know it's one certain topic that may cause them. I've even had like foster parents, when I had them come to, or relatives that had to come to do their training, and they're like, you're training me on how to be a parent. I have 13 grandkids and 7 kids, and you gave me this kid to take care of. Why do I need classes? So it's just something that happens because of their stress level. Next slide. So this quote I found, and I think it really speaks to what's important in this process. There's no shame in not knowing, the shame in lies in not finding out. So this is those times when, if someone talks to you and they say, they give you information about um, something that's kind of serious, and you don't follow up on it, that's on you. It is up to you. It's not up to them to tell you more. It's up to you to ask more. And you can't just assume that a foster parent's going to tell you the things that you know you need to know, because they don't understand the process. They're not sure what information you're gathering. Next slide. One more. That was a video. So as we conclude the home study process, um, so how I handled it was, I mentioned that I did 3 home visits because I had, my home studies are very detailed. So we've gone over some of it, but each section is extremely detailed because I want to make sure that whoever is reading this home study, they have a picture of the family and of their appropriateness to be a foster adoptive parent. But I want the family to be able to review their home study. So it's all it's all written, and then I would give it to my supervisor. She would review it and say, "Hey, here's a typo." So that's a good reason too to have somebody else review is for typos. But also like, "Hey, they mentioned this. Can you clarify that?" Or, "Can you ask more about this area?" And when I was a supervisor, and had staff, that is what I would do. Is I pretty much always had them follow up because I just wanted to make sure we had as much detail as we could, and it was a way to train my workers on what to look for. And so eventually, over several years, I didn't have to do that as much because they learned, oh yeah, I should have followed up on that. Um, so then my supervisor send it back to me, then I send it to the family. So I don't provide it to the family until I've showed my supervisor. That way, if there's anything additional to address, then we can. So basically, they get to see their home study once they're approved as a home, but you may look at that a little differently depending on your desires. With the things I would leave off, I mentioned this earlier. I do not let them see a summary of their references whatsoever. Usually they're positive almost all of the time. And I could probably do a whole training on references just for the record. Um, if you don't check references currently in your foster home approval process, I would definitely recommend doing that because it can give you really good insight into strengths of the family, but also sometimes there are concerns that are brought up. 99% of the time, references are positive. My reference forms are I have them for different reasons and different people, but they're all about 15 to 20 questions long. So they're pretty extensive, but they cover everything I feel like I would want to know from an outsider's perspective on this family. And then I don't let them read the child interview portion. Those are kept confidential. So I just basically send them everything except I put those on as attachments. And keep in mind the home studies, that's not just for your agency. If your family is going to adopt, then the tribal court or the state court is going to see a copy of that. If you have a tribal state agreement or contract to where your home study, you have to send it to the state because they're the ones that operate your foster care funds, or they put your homes in their system so that your homes can take state custody children from your tribe. You want to be proud of that. And you want to make sure you're meeting all the requirements, but also keep in mind who's going to see this. You want it to be a really high level home study. And so I've been like, I'm proud that I've heard a lot like, Kendra, your home studies are really good. There's other tribes, even state agencies that don't really have as much detail. But I don't feel like I overkill it either. I think that I'm doing the right amount of gathering what I should. And you might be at a point at your tribe right now to where you have a one-page home study. Build upon that. You have a foundation, keep going with it. I know that there's a lot of resources out there about home studies. You can actually, if you Google Tribal Information Exchange, I actually have a couple of tools that I've put onto there, and that's through the Capacity Building for Tribes. And that resource I'm going to send out to you guys, you'll have a link to their website through that as well. But that is something I recommend you share with any other foster care workers as well. Um, and then again, so as far as this is a situation that happened with the home study, there were two Chickasaw children that I wanted to place in one of our Chickasaw homes for adoption, and it was just a whole crazy thing. And the former foster parents of the kids who they'd been moved from, was like going to try to file an adoption. It was just kind of crazy. Um, but I get a copy of their home study because I'm able to, because it was our case and we're a legal party, and I read their home study. I read the entire thing, and I was able to use information in that home study to prove why they were not fit, and it had to do with the history of drug abuse and probably about 10 other things. And I'm like, and when they were approved as a kinship home, which you may know sometimes the standards for a relative or kinship home, they're similar, but there's more flexibility in like things in their past maybe than a non-relative home. And so that's what the state had done, approved them, and then they like transferred them to be just a foster home once the relative kids went home. And so I was able to bring that up in court, and the judge is like, was side-eyeing the state. And then we brought forward our home study that I wrote. I brought the family. I was the worker, the supervisor. I wrote their home study. I did their training, and I was able to answer every question the judge had to show that this Chickasaw family, which was ICWA compliant, was also the best family for the child, not just because of ICWA, but because they were prepared to do this. And I haven't worked with them in a while, but we're Facebook friends, and the kids are just doing amazing. And so it makes me feel proud that I was able, because of the level and the quality of the home study that I provided and how well I got to know the family, it helped make sure that these Chickasaw children were adopted by a Chickasaw family. Um, so then next slide is the kind of the closeout. So my contact information is here. I will send out this PowerPoint, but if you want to take a picture, my cell phone number is on there. You can text me, you can email me. So I mentioned that my last day at my tribe is tomorrow. So my day job, I will be working with the University of Denver Graduate School of Social Work. I'm working remotely from Oklahoma, but I'll be working in the Butler Institute under the Capacity Building Center for Tribes grant. So I may not be doing this type of work as much because it might conflict with what my new role is, but I definitely am more than happy to always talk with you about best practices on approving homes, on your application, your onboarding process. This is just really my passion, is making sure that we're assessing families as best we can, because for 10 whole years that was what I did every single day, was work with foster adopted families. I've been approved as a foster parent myself, and this process is really a critical tool to protect children that have been placed into foster care. um, but if there's any questions, I definitely want to invite you to come off of mute, turn your video on, or use the chat. um, and this is a good time to kind of have a conversation. So, Miguet, you in? I'll be on for a few more minutes, so don't be shy. And thank you, Valerie. I see a clapping. That was cool. I don't ever use Teams to present, so this was kind of new.
Thank you so much for all the good information. We appreciate it. I'll see you in a few minutes too to see if we have any questions. And yeah, congrats on your new job.
Thank you. Yeah. I'm excited to work from home. You may have heard my dog bark like once or twice. I have the good dog in here and the bad dog in there. The good dog is the rescue. The bad one is the one I raised from a puppy. You know how it goes.
Right.
They're in a kennel, never, but because I didn't want him running around being crazy.